In today's video, Japan's most unusual author Sayaka Murata has a new translation out, Vanishing Worlds. From Japan to Argentina, can Agustina Bazterrica follow her debut novel Tender is the Flesh with an amazing follow-up, The Unworthy. Another author following on from a massive debut is Natasha Brown and her new novel Universality. The story of a 100-year-old plot-growing murderess, A House for Miss Pauline by Diane McCaulay. The worst book I have ever read since I learnt what objectivism is. The Party by Robyn Harding. If Groundhog Day was a runaway indie Danish hit novel on the calculation of volume part 1, a Brazilian classic, the posthumous memoir of Brass Cubas. Harriet Tubman hires a gay man to help her fledgling rock career. Harriet Tubman live in concert. It was a hit in its native Latvia. The River by Laura Vinogradova. The new novel from Australian literary sensation Diana Reid, Signs of Damage. Divorced parents get the news that their daughter has been in a hit and run and is in a coma in Jennifer Haigh's new novel Rabbit Moon. A Tasmanian woman investigates her Moroccan roots in Half-Truths by Nadia Mahjouri. The Boy from the Sea by Garrett Carr. And Han Kang's first novel since winning the Nobel Prize, We Do Not Part. Hello and welcome to Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. My name is Scott. If you're new here, this is a channel where I review new releases, and if it wasn't obvious with that introduction, I like to read global books from a diverse range of locations. If you've not seen one of these videos before, I review all the books I've recently read, starting from the worst and moving towards the best. Beginning with The Party by Robyn Harding. This is not the usual kind of book I read. I had to read it for a work book club, and I am honestly shocked that a book this bad got published. I do not remember the last time I read an author who was so incapable, who could not write a sentence, whose characters managed to be both inconsistent and one-dimensional at the same time. Books like this are the reason we have literary snobs. That this book became a bestseller makes me feel so out of touch with the common reader. This is a book not even fit to be toilet paper, which I admit is mostly because I read it as an ebook, but also because nobody needs their asshole getting stupider. Okay, so the plot basically is that some girl comes over to another girl's house for her birthday party, brings some booze, gets drunk, falls through a glass coffee table, hurts herself quite badly, and then the parents go all judgy, fighty, legal, stupid, I don't know, I stopped caring, because it doesn't really matter because they have stacks of money anyway and nobody is going to be too much worse off. Somebody lost an eye along the way, somebody is a bitch, they don't really require motivations to be a bitch, everybody is secretly a bitch and just waiting for an excuse to unleash it. Is this targeted at an audience too stupid to understand that people have motivations, or is this really as bad as I think it is? In the intro, I compared this to the writing of Ayn Rand. Now, I know most normal people avoid reading Rand because she's repugnant, but trust me, she is also a really terrible author, repeating herself, contradicting herself, only ever creating two characters, the good ones and the bad ones, which, by the way, is one more than Robyn Harding managed to create. And Rand is so effective with her prose, she managed to turn a short story into a 1,200-page novel. But you have to admire Robyn Harding's skills because she makes Rand look like a Nobel laureate. I will say one good thing about this novel. Its substance is lacking so much that it is completely forgettable, unlike Rand. And I managed to physically read the 350 pages of this book in less than 4 hours, which is not something I've ever been able to do before. And I guess you can do those things when the book is written to a first grade reading level. This was beyond dire. This book made me lose hope in the future of humanity. On to the next novel, The Posthumous Memoirs of Brass Cubas by Machado de Assis. This is an 1881 Brazilian classic, and it is stupid. It's quite intentionally stupid, which is funny, but that gets old very, very quickly. Mostly because the jokes are really just different versions of the same joke being repeated. And they're legit funny to begin with, but I don't need them again and again and again. This is a tragic comedy about a privileged man living in Brazil and Portugal, being chronically average and squandering his position through stupidity and incompetence. This is everything I hate about modernism. I just cannot relate to books with characters that are only superficially present, that eschew all attempts of a meaningful plot and self-sabotage their very simplistic themes in an attempt to be super meta. This is a very influential book in Brazilian literature, and I don't for the life of me understand why. And that's a very unsatisfying feeling for me. I don't mind disliking a book, but it upsets me not to be able to figure out what other readers enjoyed from the book. I mean, I guess it's funny, but I really thought that most readers like myself would have grown tired with the comedy after about page 20. I can only really say, if you liked James Joyce, you should read this, but as I think Joyce is the most overrated author to ever live, I think that's not a very high recommendation from me. I'm really picking some literary fights in this video, aren't I? The negative reviews are not over yet. I still have to review The Unworthy by Agustina Bazterrica, translated from Spanish by Sarah Moses. This is my third Bazterrica book, and I don't think an author has ever moved from a favourite to somebody I'm going to avoid and stop reading so quickly. I'm honestly scared to reread Tender is the Flesh after this novel and her short story collection that came out in between. She should have retired and left it there. This is a horror dystopian novel about a convent of nuns in a post-apocalyptic world. The Sacred Sisterhood, as they're called. It is controlled by fear and coercion. Let's discuss the issues here. There really isn't a plot. I mean, I guess there is, but it's not there. There's also not a setting. The world, it's really fleetingly built. I don't feel like I understood the complexities of it, which makes me think that there weren't any. Maybe I was just waiting for or looking for something that just wasn't there. The characters had no depth, they weren't constructed, and the themes were minimal. It's a horror novel, nothing else. And it's a poor one at that. It lacks the focus and the suspense to be a good horror novel. And if you can hear snoring in the background, my dog likes to nap next to my microphone while I film. He's considerate like that. This is a novel that keeps its readers in the dark, causing the readers to completely lose interest in what's happening because they don't have a clue. Not knowing what's happening or why it's happening is really boring. When it's revealed, it's rushed and a complete anticlimax, which is a good summation of this book. I'm happy to announce that the 1-star reviews in this video are over, but it's not happy times yet, because I have a novel that really disappointed me. I'd say that this is my most disappointing read of 2025. Universality by Natasha Brown. A man is murdered at a rave, bludgeoned to death with a gold bar. I love that metaphor. But that's where the novel goes off the rails for me. A journalist writes a piece, and then we start to learn about the people in this piece. We know who did the murder pretty early on, but we try to understand the situations and the motives, and not just of the murderer, but of this group of anarchists who lived on the farm. Assembly was this lovely bite-sized piece of literature that did so much and had such complete themes. And I do wonder if Brown has been influenced by her own very short and impactful literature and had decided to keep Universality down, because at 150 pages there's not enough space for Brown to write about what she's trying to write about. It rockets along at a stupidly fast pace, leaving behind the clarity of plot and character construction. There are just too many characters, and at the end I don't feel like I understood their relationships with each other. This just feels rushed and sloppy from an author that can and has done done so much better. Let me give you an example of this. There has been a lot of books lately that include biased journalism or journalism just completely lacking in morals. Books that are critical of our media, and this is another book like that. It's not really enough to say that the media is biased. Of course it is. Everything is biased. And I don't think it's particularly revelatory or intelligent to say that the media doesn't act impartially. We all know it doesn't act impartially. We all know that there's right-wing and left-wing media. What is lacking from this novel is any nuance in that discussion. And I think this is missing because our journalist isn't a fully realised character. I am sure Brown has a fantastic idea of who her characters are, but she's cut too much from her end product in an attempt to make this book fast-paced, that we lose sight of who everybody is. We lose that nuance of characters, and her communication of who they are just doesn't come across. Pacing, in my opinion, is the most overvalued aspect of a novel. Please, authors, stop telling us that pacing is what makes a novel good. Kazuo Ishiguro is maybe the most popular author in literary fiction writing today, and he's made a career out of ignoring pacing and just writing good books. Brown has produced a critique of the powers in our society, and I agree with most to all of her points and her arguments, but she's not pushed the boat out. It's just a little simplistic, and that's what happens when you don't construct characters with details. Vanishing World by Sayaka Murata, translated from Japanese by Jini Tape Tapamore. We're into books that I would call good now, but this is still a really disappointing novel for me. Murata has built a career out of questioning relationships, sex, and so on. Particularly, she finds the idea of having sex with your partner, the person you build a life with, weird. And I enjoy this mental probing because it examines your assumptions on the topic. It's never enough to label Murata a weirdo and dismiss her world or her ideas. You actually have to understand why her ideas make you feel uncomfortable, what you object about her ideas, and what is important for you. And I really, really love her books. She is one of my favourite authors. But the reason I find this book so disappointing is that I could have told you all that before reading this novel. There is nothing new in this. She has written this book before, and she's done a better job of it previously. This can happen when an author is both obsessed with a topic and who is translated, because Vanishing Worlds was published in Japan before Convenience Store Woman, Earthlings, and Life Ceremony. And I think it needs to be read before those books. You know, were you to cut a few pages out of this, it would have been a fantastic novella to include in with the Life Ceremony collections of short stories. Thematically, that is where it fits. And I think that's the real disappointing thing about this book. Had I have read it first, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. Had I been able to see Murata's ideas evolve from this, I would have appreciated this as a much better book than I did. In a world where humans no longer have traditional sex, Amain is one of the rare breed of humans. Her mum did it with her dad in a tree. Sexing. That last part maybe isn't in this book. Sex between married couples is now called incest. They're, after all, family members. But sex as we know it is dying. Amain has sex with anime characters, and I'll let your imagination figure out how that one works. What we consider physical sex is very rare, and people avoid it. When it comes up, a lot of people act like they're just not ready for it, like they're a teenager first discovering what it is. And without sex between married couples, everybody is dating, looking to have sex with a boyfriend or a girlfriend. But again, sex has a different meaning in this world to ours. And this, I don't think, made much sense to me. Why is the entire population dating like every night that they can if they already have a partner to spend time with and are not interested in what we call sex? I guess That's the point of this, to push you into asking, what is sex, what is dating, what is intimacy, what is a relationship? Marriage as an institution is under threat in this world, and this mirrors global marriage trends. But in this world it's becoming pretty pointless, as sex isn't a thing and babies are created in different ways. As the main begins to experiment with sex more, her husband Saku goes the other way, and when the couple moves to Experiment City, they see nameless children raised by the society as a whole, without parents, bred in a lab. And that's the point of this book. It hits you with questions about the nature of marriage, sex, and family. It hits you with those questions about raising a family. And it asks, if we're continuing to have babies via IVF and other methods, will our evolutionary drive to have sex disappear? And if we're no longer horny fuckhounds, what do we get out of sex? How we would replace the intimacy and connection we get? And what does it mean in a world where the very nature of marriage is different to ours? This actually is a fantastic book. It's asking a lot of questions, it's making you feel uncomfortable and forcing you to submit your own views on things, and really asking you why you think what you think. But as I stated at the beginning of this review, Murata has done all that before I've read it. These are not new themes she has tackled, and as I said at the start of this book, it's because this was written first in Japan and has been translated last. Should I have read this first, I am sure that this would have been one of the last books I reviewed in this video. But as it is, it has to come in now. The Boy from the Sea by Garrett Carr. On the west coast of Ireland, a baby boy washes up. He will be called Brendan and is raised by a fisherman Ambrose and his family, his wife Christine and his son Declan, who is of a very similar age to Brendan. I read that description and thought this would be a bit of a mystery and involve why a mother would abandon a child, and that is not what this book is. It is kind of touched on, but it's really about relationships between various members of the family, especially the two boys, and how they fit into a family, who is the favourite, and so on. Declan resents Brendan and tells the boys at school they're not really brothers. As the boys grow up, this becomes a common and repeated theme. Declan feels like Brendan is taking his secure place in the family. As Brendan develops an interest in fishing, Ambrose's business, Declan cannot help but to pursue the same career, even though it isn't the one that he is interested in. It is the love of his father that he is more interested in. Belongings and families are the key themes explored here. Look, this was well enough written. I was happy to keep reading it, but it was a bit bland. I didn't find the relationships overly complex, nor did I find them beautiful or massively emotionally impactful. It's a simple book that does everything well enough, but it doesn't do anything exceptionally well. The characters are probably the best aspect of this novel, although to be honest, everything is a pretty consistent, good level of quality. And it's a book that lacks that hero element. It lacks that memorable scene. There are plenty of inferior books that read much better than this book because they have more soul and more character. A House for Miss Pauline by Diane McCaulay. A 99-year-old woman knows she isn't going to make it to 100 and questions what will happen to her house when she dies. Cue an intriguing story that contains many surprises, including murder and becoming a large pot farmer in the area. A typical Caribbean novel is one with a cracking story, but a plot that doesn't come at the expense of the themes or the sophistication of the characters. And this is a good combination for a novel, and it is a hard one to write. Additionally, Caribbean novels are often written with this lovely patois, which I deeply enjoy reading. McCaulay, as I'm sure you can imagine, has the patois down pat. I mean, obviously a Jamaican can write in a Jamaican dialect. I have nothing but compliments on the prose, and it does add a sense of place to the novel. A 99-year-old pot-dealing, foul-mouthed murderess. That is an interesting character, but ultimately I found her a tad bit simple. Once the initial "this lady is really cool" vibe wore off, I was wanting a tiny bit more indulgence on what she was underneath. Still a good character, but I'm saying she's a good character and not a great character. And I kind of want to say the same about the plot. It had its twists and turns, and they weren't contrived, they weren't unnecessary, they were always interesting, they always added to it. But I think what makes a plot really good is having the reader desire an outcome. And there was an intention to do that, but I just didn't really care as much about the outcome as I should have. I cared about the journey much more than the outcome. So again, a good plot, but not a great plot. I appreciate the themes around who gets to own property and how colonialism fits into that equation. They're valuable themes, and I think they're really well explored. But overall, I think the themes are a little bit simplistic for me. I think at a touch over 300 pages, we really needed more than that as the themes. This is a book where legacy and aging are things that just really lend themselves to being explored in the novel, and they're not really explored at all. I think if we were to explore Pauline's desire for a legacy and her feelings around aging and her mortality, that would have helped build Pauline as a much fuller character, and it would have helped with the plot too. Ultimately, this is a novel that works together, but maybe not as well as other novels. Everything is done to a level I certainly couldn't write. I had fun reading this book. It's a good book, but again, just like The Boy from the Sea, it is a novel lacking in greatness. And I think that it lacked because Diane McCaulay should have been a little bit more ambitious in her themes and chase a few more of the opportunities that her novel presented her with. We Do Not Part by Han Kang, translated by Paige Aniyah Morris. This is a novel about friendship and about a real historical Korean massacre. And for people who have read Han Kang before, the massacre gives it a real human acts feel. But there's a lot more going on, and much less focus is given to the horrible parts of history, making it a different book. There is also this snowstorm, which is very white and clearly gives it a bit of a white book feel. And there is this slightly off friendship, which gives it a little bit of a vegetarian feel. Okay, that's maybe a little bit tenuous, but this is a book that feels somewhere between all of her previous novels. Essentially, this is a book about two women. One is in hospital and calls the other, asking her to visit her home on Jeju Island and help her pet Garrett and help her pet Parrot before a snowstorm hits. Our protagonist Kaija travels to Jeju, becoming trapped in a storm and going from this desire to save her friend's bird to just get warm and safe herself. This is interspersed with flashbacks from the Jeju uprising, or should I say the subsequent suppression that happened afterwards. Now I'm going to be super honest with you here. I didn't get large parts of this book. In general, I think books are too complex to ever understand them in their entirety. But most books I read, I understand enough to make an informed, broader comment on the value of the novel. I would vaguely say I get most of the books that I read, even if I don't get all of the Easter eggs in the book. But this is a book where a lot went over my head, starting with the Jeju uprising and its place in the history of Korea. Now, I'm catching up with book reviews when I had some pretty big stuff going on in my life, and I certainly didn't have a lot of headspace to dedicate to pondering over a complex novel such as what Han Kang writes. But I do very much recommend looking up a quick rundown of the Jeju uprising, because Han Kang is a Korean author writing to a Korean audience who will no doubt know about the Jeju uprising a lot more than a Western reader, and having a basic understanding of what happened there will allow Han Kang to colour in the details for you. The other thing that I just do not have a good sense for is that any time a society is taught about history from the society around it, especially when we're talking about a government that is post-Korean War, it is incredibly biased. And understanding that bias and where it comes from and examining that bias is not something that we can do as Western audiences unless you've immersed yourself in Korean society, history, or literature. So I definitely found those large parts completely over my head. But also, Kang infuses a lot of her writing with metaphors and images, and she's a tough author to understand everything that's going on. She uses all of the literary techniques around. This is certainly not a bad book. My issues with this book are really about me as a reader, and at the time that I was reading it as well. It's definitely a book that I want to reread when I'm in a better and a more intelligent place in my life. And it's not to say that I didn't enjoy reading it. If I hated this book, I would have said so. You know, I hate books I get nothing out of, and I got a fair bit out of this book still. I just don't feel like I can say just how good this book is. Should this book have been the best book I read in my reading period, or would it have only been 1 or 2% better than the experience I got? How do you know that if you just don't appreciate the things that you are missing? Kang conjures up this huge, intense feeling of seclusion and isolation in this novel. Sometimes she is very heavy-handed. For example, she's using this big snowstorm, while other times she can be really nuanced. The relationships between the two friends in this novel is a great example. As the novel grows, so does our knowledge of this friendship, and their relationship becomes increasingly distant and weak, increasingly isolated and secluded. And also it becomes increasingly strange that a request to save a pet parrot was made in this friendship. I have previously found Kang to either write some of the best books I've ever read or write books that I absolutely hated. She's happy to take risks and she embraces different styles. She's not always writing to the same audience from book to book as well, which does definitely lend itself to being a bit of a love it or hate her writer. I found this novel rich in literary techniques, but it still followed the traditional form of a book and was not overly experimental. As an example, it has a plot. Not always the case with Kang's books. I don't think that readers who are primarily looking for a plot will like Han Kang's novels at all, but I find plot to be a real binding agent in a novel. I understand that some readers find plot to be distracting from the broader themes and they don't need or want a plot, but plot for me is essential. It can be a simple or a weak plot, but it's essential to give me something to bridge everything together. And Kang's plot does what I like. It provides narrative and human insight into the themes while being fairly easy to follow and something that just ticks along in the background. Relationships are something Kang does exceptionally well, and there are remarkably few in this novel, but those that do exist are key to the novel. Kang is using the relationship between our two main women as a metaphor, and she's layering the history of Jeju Island on top of this relationship. She has been double-handed or even triple or quadruple-handed. It is the relationship that provides the societal critique of the politics and the history of the island. Or rather, is it the history and the politics that adds extra substance to the relationship between the characters? I mean, the answer is both. And that is both what I really liked about this book and my frustration with not having understood enough about the history of Jeju Island going into reading this book. And in some ways, I think this book really represents a reader's dilemma. Kang is supremely talented. She is showing what she can do. I mean, she's coming off winning a Nobel Prize in Literature, and I don't think anybody has said that that wasn't deserved. She has produced a book that is rich and beautiful, but is it enjoyable to read? And that really depends on how much the reader wants to engage their brain, how much they want to use those brain muscles that they developed in high school English or literature. And I'm certainly not saying that is a negative thing, but for most of you watching this video, I think this is a book that you need to sort of wait until you're in the right frame of mind to read. And for some of you, that might be 23 and a half hours of any day of the year, but for others, that might be let's wait until retirement. This book is a work of art. I just wish I could have got more out of it. I wish that I was in a position where I understood everything and could truly appreciate this book. Half-Truths by Nadia Mahjouri. New mother Zara is trying to figure out a few things. Her identity, her relationship with her husband, her relationship with her father, who she has never met. Or rather, I should say, who her father is. She takes her child to Marrakesh with her on a 5-week trip to find her father, and she finds Khadija, a woman packing up her home of 50 years and finally beginning to give up hope that her son will return after more than 20 years missing. You do eventually find out if the two characters are grandmother and granddaughter, but in many ways it doesn't matter if they are or they aren't. Zahir needs a connection to her father's people. She is distinctly Australian among Moroccans, but her olive skin and curly hair hints that she is genetically half Moroccan. But culturally, the nationality is absent from her identity, and she has this sort of culture shock. I guess you could call it culture shock, although it's not a bad thing. It's a combination of being curious and in awe and intrigued and uncertain. Zahir is quite young, a newer adult who is still learning everything about the world, and she's in a new country. And I think that this is captured really well in the novel. How travel changes, enriches and enwisens the youth is captured superbly. And if you're watching this and you're aged between 13 and 30 and you haven't been overseas, do it. Figure out how you're going to save the money and experience a different culture. Any different culture. I don't care if it's as simple as, say, you're from Canada, traveling to Ireland for 6 days, or as extreme as going to Sierra Leone for 6 months. You will grow as a human, and hopefully along the way you'll have a really good time. One of the things I love about traveling is learning something new about the local history, and that is what happens to Zahir too. Khadija slowly reveals her story to Zahar, and this provides something I love about historical fiction: the human impact of large historical events. I thought this was a well-constructed slow reveal. I loved the character work. I enjoyed the flawed but forgivable characters. Some of their flaws were such that I couldn't be sure I wouldn't make the same mistakes myself. Like, it's easy to say stupid mistake when you're reading a book and you're distant from the situation, but it's a different thing when you're in the same situations as the characters. And I'd like to think that I wouldn't do the stupid things they did, but I've made enough dumb mistakes in my life to know that I don't always take the sensible path. And these were mistakes I could very much empathize with making. It's a very good way to humanize a character, to give them flaws that the reader can relate to, or at the very least understand. This book is a touch commercial for me. I would definitely prefer a little bit more exploration of the themes and a little bit more complexity. It's not that these things are missing, but it was the intention of the author to keep things just that little bit lighter. It's not a bad thing, it's just a flavour, and it's who the audience is for this book, and I still think it's a really enjoyable book that was very well written. Signs of Damage by Diana Reid. This has got some pretty average reviews, and that surprised me. I would have thought it would be all over the shop, if I'm completely honest. 13-year-old Cass goes missing when on holidays with her friend and their family in the south of France. Hours later, she is discovered and the incident dismissed as a close shave. 16 years later, when the Kelly family's father dies, Cass comes to pay her respects, not just to her childhood friend and their family, but Cass's husband is also linked to the Kelly family. And while this is all going on, Cass's issues with her psychosomaticism are getting worse. This is quite a frustrating novel to review because it is really plot based, and I can't tell you the themes without spoiling parts of the plot. But I don't think it's a spoiler at all to say Cass has a mental illness caused by trauma that has impacted her ability to understand the present. I do think it would be a spoiler to tell you what that trauma is. It is a bit of a literary thriller novel. Imagine that a super talented author got inspired by something like Verity by Colleen Hoover. You know, there's a few secrets and twists in this novel, but they're not just there for shock value. They do push the plot along a bit. They are entertaining from a thriller point of view, but they come with a reveal of information that makes you reconsider things and builds characters. It's a really intelligent way of layering a novel and building themes. It allows you to explore things from different angles without needing additional characters or unlikely coincidences. Unfortunately for me, I found one of the characters particularly unbelievable, and her actions towards the end of the novel spoiled what was otherwise a very interesting exploration of mental illness, as well as some of the other dark themes that I don't wish to name. And that really does impact the overall quality of this book. It could have been something really, really good. Ultimately, I think it is a novel for people who can ignore flaws and appreciate qualities, because it's definitely a novel that has both in abundance. And so, while I thought that all the average reviews were a little bit unfair, I've given it another average review myself. I will say that I found the qualities to be much more enjoyable than the flaws. On the Calculation of Volume, Part 1, by Solvej Balle, translated from Danish by Barbara J Haveland. I found this quite a curious little novel. It is essentially Groundhog Day without Bill Murray and a lot more introspection. I actually suspect that this could be something wonderful, something amazing, but I'm not completely sold on it yet. This is part 1, and there are 7 parts overall. Now I'm picking up part 2 as soon as I can get my hands on it. This book has sucked me in. I'm curious, I'm interested, I want to know more, but not enough has happened in this book yet for this book to stand on its own in my mind. I'm a little bit tempted to say, no, let's wait for all 7 novels to be released and start again and read it all in one chunk. A lot of this book is world building. For example, if I eat a biscuit, does the biscuit disappear from the world when the world resets, or does it stay there? And the world is resetting when she goes to sleep. What happens if she stays up all night? So you get sucked into this puzzle. What would you do differently? What experiments would you do yourself? How would you take advantage of this situation? I love that our protagonist's partner just believes her. He's skeptical to a normal level, but he's always on her side. He trusts what she is saying. Unfortunately, he never remembers the conversations they've had in the past, so it's hard for him to help her, often asking questions that she already knows the answer to. I do find this book incredibly hard to rate or review. I found it very hard to place in my order from least to most favourite. It sucked me in, but I don't feel it needed to end where it ended. I think that this is too short, and the divvying up of it into 7 books feels a little unnecessary. I don't want it to continue like this for another 6 books and have it be all revealed in the 7th book, because I will get bored. But right now, I'm really curious, I'm really sucked in, and I just want to know more. On to the last 3 books, and I think it's very fair to say this is a big step up in quality right here. It hasn't been the best reading update, if I'm honest, but I'm about to make up with that with 3 books you should go out and read. You should buy, borrow, or steal them, but please have some morals. Only steal from large organisations that exploit their workers. And I will also say I probably could have switched up the order of these 3 on any given day, but this is the order I've gone with. Rabbit Moon by Jennifer Haigh. Love the premise of this book. Divorced couple Claire and Aaron get the news that their child, who is living in China on a gap year teaching English, has been in a hit-and-run accident and is in a coma fighting for her life. They instantly fly to Shanghai to be with Lindsay, their daughter. I love the complexities of relationships that this brings up, but Haigh doesn't take advantage of that. Instead, she does something very different with this book. And I love what she has done, and I wouldn't change Rabbit Moon for the world, but also, if anybody knows a book like that description, please tell me in the comments, because I feel like I'm missing out on a really messy, complex relationship between divorced parents that I would love to have read. This novel is much more about Lindsay, who shouldn't have been in Shanghai, certainly not with an apartment full of her belongings, maybe on a weekend trip. And this mystery is at the centre of the themes of this novel. I'm going to take a minute and come back to what this mystery is, but I want to bring up Grace first, Lindsay's adopted younger Chinese sister, and the inspiration for Lindsay's trip to China. What is really interesting is Grace, as an adopted child to white American parents, wants nothing to do with her Chinese genetics, choosing to embrace her American heritage, while Lindsay, who has nothing to do with China other than her adopted sister, feels the need to connect to the country and its culture. I love this way of exploring race and identity. Lindsay has the privilege of being able to immerse herself in Chinese culture and still be seen as American by people around her. But Grace, could she do the same? There is so much said there. Even if Grace could do the same, there is the perception of racism and how that perception and how that risk impacts people's actions. Grace is at summer camp and in a constant text communication with Lindsay. But an incident at camp leads to all mobile phones getting confiscated, and Grace has to resort to writing letters, unaware that her sister has been in a hit and run and is now in a coma. She has unexpectedly been extended at camp when she was expecting to go home too. Grace and Lindsay's relationship is where this novel comes alive. Unfortunately, Claire and Aaron's relationship wasn't really explored in enough depth for me, but the other relationships more than make up for that. And that brings us back to the mystery. What is Lindsay doing living in the wrong city in China? After relationship troubles with the boy she went to China with, she became an escort, and I really enjoyed the way Haigh was so non-judgmental about the entire situation, the temptation of the industry, but what is not being said as well. This situation is very much like Grace not wanting to be Chinese. Lindsay's happy to do certain things, but doesn't want to do certain other things. But can she really say no? Nothing has actually been said, but things are just known. And I've not mentioned Lindsay's gay best friend, who I loved as a character. Actually, I think I loved their friendship rather than them. I was always looking forward to his point of view returning to the novel. I think this is a really good all-round book, a book where the plots, the characters and the themes are all well balanced and all feed back into each other, making all three elements stronger for the other's existence. My only real criticism is that I wanted a little bit more of the parents. Their relationship certainly wasn't as strongly written as the other relationships in the novel, but overall I think that this is a really safe, good novel. I can't see any reader not enjoying this. I can see 3, 4 or 5 stars from just about everybody reading this. Just a really good book. The River by Laura Vinogradova, translated from Latvian by Kaija Straumanis. Ruth looks up to her older sister Diana, so when she disappears in her early 20s, she is really impacted. Years later, Ruth's father Jules, who she has never met, dies, and she unexpectedly inherits his house on the river. Curious about her father and where he lived, she leaves the city and visits the property in the country. Soon she meets neighbours Mathilde and her brother Christophe. This novel is really sparse and simple, but it is so unexpectedly deep. It is a book that really creeps up on you. Ruth is depressed. She feels like she belongs in the city but feels at home in the country. She loves the river but she's scared of it. She has a partner in the city but she's flirting with Christophe in the country. And Ruth writes daily letters to her sister Diana, hoping she will return. They say a lot of books have a journey at the heart of them, and this is true for this book too, but it's an emotional journey. Root is not okay at the beginning of this book, and Vinogradova never tells you. She lets you figure it out. She gives you enough events and interactions for you to do it, but initially I just thought she was a strange woman. I couldn't figure out what was up with her, and it is through this really consistent character writing that Root's emotions and the impacts on her become clearer. And the same with Christoph and Mathilde. Maybe not so much with Mathilde's young son, who is delightfully upbeat and full of beans. He's a child who wears his heart on his sleeve and likes everybody he comes into contact with. But some children are just like that. It is one of the things that I think makes them so awesome. This is a short, beautiful and emotional novel. It has a real small things like these vibes. Everything appears quite lovely until you realise what's actually on the page, and then it's emotional and complex and dark. And look, I bet 99% of you have never read a book from Latvia before. This is a good book. Pick it up and pop your Latvian literary cherry. Harriet Tubman, live in concert, by Bob the Drag Queen. I have a full standalone review of this book on my channel if you want a bit more details on it. You can also sort of figure out how old that review is and see just how far behind I am with my reading updates, but we'll stop mentioning that. This is a novel celebrating Harriet Tubman. She is back from the dead and she is making music. A sort of weird blend of gospel, hip-hop and unique Tubman awesomeness. And this is where I really recommend you audiobook this one, because our author Bob the Drag Queen has written and performed the music that Tubman was creating in this novel, and you can hear it at the end of the audiobook. Tubman calls on Darnell Williams, a gay hip-hop producer who is a little bit in awe of Tubman because, well, she's Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman, freer of slaves, breaker of chains, mother of dragons. Wait, that's the wrong hero. Tubman, however, is much cooler than Targaryen. She did it all without a fire-breathing lizard. One of the themes of this book is how black people should view Tubman and other black heroes, and this is clearly tackled by somebody who adores Tubman. Bob is arguing that we need to remember our heroes, but that they sacrificed so that the next generation could have a better life, and that black people should seek to honour them by striving to live a wonderful life. There is also this argument that we need new heroes, and I think that's where the hip-hop themes come in. A lot of modern black heroes are musicians, and by saying if Tubman was alive today, she'd be making music, Bob is saying she's a hero. Her role is to inspire, so she would inspire with music rather than freeing slaves. The other half of this novel follows Darnell, who is definitely not the norm of the hip-hop industry, being gay. His black story is about how he came out, or rather how he was outed, and this allows Bob to tackle homophobia in the hip-hop community. Bob, as I'm sure you can imagine from his name, is a gay man, and he's said in an interview that he loves hip-hop music too. I mean, he made hip-hop music to go with this novel, so, you know, he must like it a little bit at the least. And Darnell is not Tubman, but he can fill the role of Tubman for young gay men who love hip-hop. He can become a hero, and he can influence children and let them know it's okay to be who you are, it's okay to be black, it's okay to love music, it's okay to be gay, that you're valued. And essentially, is that all Tubman is to modern day black people? A hero that is saying it's okay to be black, it's okay to be who you are, you can achieve extraordinary things. After all, Harriet Tubman did them. Look, I think probably half of you know who Bob the Drag Queen is, and half of you will have no idea who he is. But if you do know who he is, you'll know that he's a fairly silly man. He's a drag queen, stand-up comic, singer, actor, TV presenter, and author. But he's ultimately known for his comedy. He's known for making people laugh. This seems like a fairly deep novel. It's talking about empowerment, and I guess you'd be expecting comedy from Bob. I certainly wouldn't call this comedy, but it is a book that is consistently funny. It's presenting serious art, but it's not taking itself particularly seriously. It is having fun along the way as making a point. I particularly loved a little scene where Tubman reveals that she has Frederick Douglass gossip. Like, of course she does. Also, who doesn't want to hear the secret gossip Harriet Tubman has about Frederick Douglass? Doesn't that just delight you? This was a real surprise because I was expecting something delightfully stupid, but what I got was something really intelligent. It was appropriately silly in places and definitely quite fun to read, but a superb debut, and I really hope that this isn't just a one-off from Bob, who is clearly a very multi-talented creator, but I hope that he does stick to writing and write more books, because I really enjoyed his literary style. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye-bye. And also a big thank you to all my wonderful Patreons for their support. Patreon and YouTube have allowed me to cut down a few hours of work each week to look after my sick wife a little bit better. This sort of support makes a huge difference to the quality of my life and the amount of videos I can put out. So if you like my content, please consider signing up to my Patreon. It costs less than one of those stupid, not real coffee drinks from that weird mermaid coffee chain. Bye-bye.